In the silent vastness beyond our reach, a distant star system is behaving like it no longer belongs to our universe. Its gravity defies known laws. Its light flickers with impossible patterns, and deep within its core, something unfathomable is happening, as if the very fabric of reality is warping from within. Astronomers first thought it was an error, a glitch in the data. But what if this isn't a dying system, but one being reborn? Not into a black hole, but into something far stranger, the birth of a new dimension. Join us as we travel into the heart of a cosmic anomaly that may rewrite the laws of physics. Subscribe if you believe the universe still hides secrets too big for 3 dimensions. Somewhere in the quiet outskirts of the Eridanus constellation, 1,200 light-years from Earth, a binary star system began to behave like it no longer belonged to our universe. Astronomers at the European Southern Observatory first noticed the anomaly in early 2024. What drew their attention wasn't the brilliance of this star, but its dimming. Not the slow, predictable fading of a dying sun. This was different. The light flickered in sharp, rhythmic pulses, as though the star was beating, like a heart. They named the system JX7091, a cold, unremarkable designation for what would become the most enigmatic cosmic event of our time. Dr. Leila Moretti, a theoretical astrophysicist with the European Southern Observatory, was among the first to take notice. She had seen stars collapse, merge, erupt, but never pulse like this. At first, she later recounted, we thought it was interference, instrumental error, but then it kept happening. The pattern was too perfect. The pulses followed a rhythm no natural process had ever produced. Every 67 seconds, the star dimmed and brightened, but not uniformly. The frequency shifted slightly with each cycle, enough to suggest intention, or at least a process far more complex than stellar decay. Soon, other observatories joined in. The Atacama Large Millimeter Array, the Keck Observatory in Hawaii, even the newly operational James Webb Space Telescope pivoted its gaze. All eyes turned toward a star system that should have been quiet, but was whispering something strange, and the whispers grew louder. JX7091 is a binary to stars orbiting a shared center of mass, but only one of them, a mid-sized blue giant, was dimming. Its partner remained constant, indifferent, almost eerily unaffected. This alone was cause for alarm. If one star was destabilizing, its gravitational partner should have shown some reaction. But the second star remained ... untouched, as if it wasn't in the same universe anymore. Dr. Moretti wasn't satisfied with surface-level explanations. She began poring through decades of archived data, old radio records, historic lensing observations, and she found something chilling. The pulses had started in 2009, faint, irregular, dismissed as background noise, but they'd grown stronger, louder, more rhythmic, as though something had been trying to get our attention. For years, she proposed a radical theory at a private symposium in Geneva. What if this isn't a star fading, but light being rerouted? Her peers were skeptical, but her words hung in the air like smoke. Light being rerouted, not lost, displaced, but displaced to where? Scientists modeled every known scenario: binary instability, magnetic reconnection, even exotic matter eruptions. But nothing matched the data. The rhythm remained unexplainable. The system had defied expectations, and worse, it had violated predictions, because stars don't flicker like this. And they certainly don't flicker in prime number sequences. Yes, that's right. The pulse intervals began to align with the progression of prime numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. It was a mathematical signature, not random, not chaotic, but intentional, like a message or a code. By mid-2025, the global astronomical community had assigned JX7091 its own task force, a multinational effort involving NASA, ESA, the Indian Space Research Organization, and a group of private AI labs specializing in signal decryption. This wasn't just a curiosity anymore. This was a crisis in understanding, because if the laws of physics didn't apply here, how many other places had we misunderstood? Cameras from the Webb telescope recorded the light curve of the star, but what they captured seemed almost alive. The flickering wasn't uniform. It fluctuated with gravitational shifts in nearby star fields. It was almost as if the system knew it was being watched. Could that be possible? Could a star react to observation? The idea wasn't new. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect tells us that particles change behavior when watched. But on a cosmic scale, it was absurd. And yet, what else could explain the changes in the rhythm every time a new telescope aligned its gaze? Moretti and her team published a paper titled Observation-Driven Fluctuation in a Distant Binary, JX7091 and the Dimensional Hypothesis. It made headlines and enemies. Critics called it speculative nonsense, but others, younger physicists, open to new paradigms, began to wonder, what if this wasn't a star at all? What if we were witnessing the beginning of an interface, not a collapse? One night, in a late live-stream broadcast from the Atacama control room, a technician named Luis Ortega whispered to the camera, "It's not dimming, it's blinking." That single sentence caught fire online. It's blinking. Millions of views. Theories flooded in. Was it Morse code, a distress signal, or something deeper, a mechanism of transformation? And in the background of all the speculation, the star pulsed on calm, steady, prime, waiting. What would you do if a star started communicating with numbers? Would you listen? Would you answer? Because, in the next chapter, the anomaly doesn't just play with light, it begins to bend space itself. If light is the universe's storyteller, then gravity is its architect, shaping galaxies, curving time, holding worlds in their dance. But around JX7091, gravity was beginning to tell a different story. It started with lensing. In March of 2025, the Vera C. Rubin Observatory captured a strange distortion in the star field behind JX7091. Normally, a massive object like a star would cause a predictable lensing effect, bending the light from background stars into arcs or rings. But here, the distortion wobbled, not in sync with the binary's orbit, not in sync with anything. Dr. Kenji Ayama, a gravitational physicist working with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, reviewed the data himself. It wasn't just light bending, he said. It was space, spasming. The stars behind JX7091 flickered and stretched like reflections on a broken mirror. At first, they suspected computational artifacting, a bug in the image reconstruction AI. But the effect persisted across multiple telescopes, multiple wavelengths, multiple observation windows, and then came the gravitational echo, sensors. At LIGO and Virgo, Earth's premier gravitational wave observatories, detected a faint ripple that didn't match any known black hole merger, neutron collision, or stellar event. It was smoother, subtler, like a tremor at the edge of understanding. They triangulated its origin, JX7091, except nothing had happened. No explosion, no collapse, no visible activity that could justify a gravitational wave, which left only one possibility. Something unseen had moved, or worse, something had changed in the fabric itself. Moretti and Aoyama met for the first time via a secure conference link. What they discussed would shake both their paradigms. Aoyama proposed a chilling idea. We're not seeing gravitational effects from an object. We're seeing gravitational behavior from an absence, like a missing brick still casting weight. They ran simulations, each one failed. The mass distribution of JX7091 didn't make sense. If the blue giant were warping gravity this violently, it should be visibly distorted, torn apart. But the star remained intact, stable, except for its pulsing. It was as if the mass was present, but not here. Moretti introduced a term from theoretical physics, mass mirroring. A speculative idea suggesting that mass could exist in overlapping dimensional strata, projecting gravity across membranes like a hand pressing into fabric. You don't see the hand. You feel the pressure. If JX7091 had one foot in our dimension and another in somewhere else, could that explain the bending of space, the pulse-driven gravitational anomalies? Could it mean impossibly that space itself was thinning? They issued a joint advisory to the International Astronomical Union. JASCI's may represent a non-classical interaction between dimensional mass systems. It may be the first natural object partially transitioning into an alternate dimensional structure. The media dubbed it the phantom star. Public fascination exploded. So did fear. People wanted answers. Was it dangerous? Could such dimensional ruptures spread? Was Earth vulnerable? Aoyama held a press conference and was candid. We are watching the laws of physics. Hesitate. That's not something you ignore. And the system escalated. By July, the distortion radius around JX7091 had doubled. Background stars bent into ribbons. Some disappeared entirely from spectrographic data, not hidden behind the star, but gone, as if the space between us and them had folded inward. That's when the GNS anomaly occurred. The global navigation satellite network, used for everything from phones to cargo ships, reported a microsecond drift, a discrepancy in the Earth's gravitational reference frame. It was small, barely measurable, but it coincided exactly with a new ripple from JX7091. Earth had trembled, not from any seismic activity, but from a distant change in the universe's gravitational baseline. Something far away had touched us, and in that moment, a terrifying possibility arose. Gravity isn't local. If dimensional transitions can propagate gravitational echoes across light years, then JX7091 isn't isolated. It's connected. But connected to what? Dr. Elena Cho, a mathematician from Seoul National University, proposed a model of dimensional spillover. According to her equations, if a star were interacting with a higher dimensional axis, its gravitational signature could leak across other branes, like an ink drop spreading across hidden pages. This could explain the expanding distortions, the phantom lensing, even the tremor on Earth. And if she was right, then we weren't just witnessing a dimensional anomaly. We were inside its ripple. What would it mean for gravity to misbehave? For the very force that binds time and space to decouple from our reality? As the data continued pouring in, a picture began to form, dark, elegant, and terrifying. Something massive was changing at JX7091. And it wasn't collapsing into a singularity, it was folding out, expanding into something we couldn't yet define. And as it did, it left behind an even stranger fingerprint. Light. Light that shouldn't exist. Light that talks. Because in the next chapter, the star doesn't just bend gravity. It begins to paint with impossible colors. If gravity is the universe's sculptor, then light is its voice, whispering ancient stories across the void. But the light from JX7091 no longer spoke a language we understood. When the James Webb Space Telescope turned its infrared eye toward the binary system, the initial readings were baffling. The star pulsed in standard UV and visible spectra, but layered within those pulses was something else. A faint, structured signal in the far-infrared range. Not random, not noise, but organized, as if the light had been designed. NASA's spectral analysis team ran the data through every known stellar model. None matched, so they turned to machine learning. The AI, named Karma, was trained on over a century of astrophysical emissions: black holes, neutron stars, quasars, white dwarfs. KARMA flagged the signal from JX7091 as anomalously structured. When pushed further, the AI produced something unexpected: a fractal geometry, a self-replicating, recursive pattern. But not in 3 dimensions. The light mapped out a structure consistent with a 4th spatial axis. Dr. Layla Moretti sat in stunned silence as the visual formed a spiraling lattice, like DNA coiled within itself, but curling through a direction no human could imagine. It's like trying to see a shadow cast by a shape we can't hold, she whispered. Like watching a sculpture dance through time. To visualize this, physicists turned to analogies. Imagine a 2-dimensional creature trying to understand a sphere. It would only ever see slices, circles that grow and shrink as the sphere passes through its plane. In the same way, we may be seeing just the projections of a higher dimensional object collapsing or unfolding through our 3D reality, and the light. It was the only clue we had to its true form. Dr. Xavier Mahoney from the European Space Agency described it as light coded by a higher intelligence, or a higher geometry. But what could produce such precision? The pulsing, already rhythmic, began shifting again, now echoing patterns found in prime numbers and Fibonacci sequences. The intervals between pulses followed mathematical relationships seen in everything from sunflower seeds to spiral galaxies. This wasn't random behavior, it was intentional structure. The public seized on this. Speculation flooded forums and media. Was the star intelligent? Was it broadcasting? A beacon, a warning, a doorway? Moretti, ever cautious, proposed a theory she dubbed the dimensional projection model. If JX7091 was phasing between dimensions, then its light emissions might not be from the star, but through it, like sunlight through stained glass, warped by an invisible architecture. To test this, scientists launched the Aquila probe, a remote infrared relay designed to orbit within a few million kilometers of the system. It took 6 weeks to arrive. What it sent back changed everything. Aquila captured a phenomenon never before seen. Light looping photons traced recursive spirals, not because of gravity, but because the very space they traveled through was curved in unnatural ways. The light didn't just bend, it folded into itself, like time-lapse footage of a wave reversing. The spectral data revealed something chilling. Aquila's own infrared signature was beginning to mimic the pattern of JX 7091. Its instruments weren't just observing, they were being changed. The probe was pulled out early. But by then, it was too late. Aquila had become the first human-made object to emit higher-dimensional light, and it raised a terrifying possibility. Could we be changed by exposure to quasar? Possible that observation alone, the mere act of seeing this light, might alter the observer. Quantum physicists like Dr. Sarah Elmslie took this seriously. She recalled the observer effect on a subatomic level, how watching a particle can collapse its probability into reality. Now, imagine that principle, she said, applied not to particles, but to entire regions of space-time. Were we collapsing a dimension just by looking? Or was something on the other side? Looking back, in universities around the world, students pored over the raw data. Forums lit up with user-generated simulations. One anonymous poster, username DeltaWave01, claimed to have replicated the spiral pattern using a form of 5D parametric equations, ones that produced impossible rotational geometries. Physicists were stunned. The math worked, but who was DeltaWave01? No one knew. And then came the image, a composite from dozens of telescopes, sharpened and filtered. It wasn't a photo, but a visual reconstruction of the light's internal map. What it showed couldn't be explained. A shape, soft, symmetrical, ever-shifting, suspended in a void, glowing with light, not quite red, not quite blue dot. It didn't look like a star. It looked like a wound in the fabric of reality, and at its core, something shimmered. Something that pulsed not like a machine, but like a mind. Was it alive, or was this just how a dying universe whispers? Whatever the truth, one thing had become clear. JX7091 was no longer a stellar object. It was a message, a mirror, a monument, and, perhaps, a map. But maps lead somewhere, and in the next chapter, we follow the light to where it might be going. Silence is the expected sound of space, but around JX7091, silence cracked. On August 17th, 2025, a low-frequency radio signal reached Earth, pulsed, persistent, and coming from the edge of the binary system. It wasn't dramatic, no loud burst or laser-like beam. It was soft, almost hesitant, like a whisper finding its way across a collapsing room. But the whisper repeated, over and over again, in patterns too regular to be natural, yet too complex to be artificial. Not a code, not a message, something in between, something we hadn't heard before. The signal came from just outside the event margin, the boundary where JX7091's light distortion, gravitational anomalies, and structural warping reached. Critical deviation. Scientists called it the threshold zone, but others began calling it what it felt like. The edge. Dr. Clara Voss, a young signal analyst at the SETI Institute, was one of the first to isolate the pulses. She described it as a language that's not trying to communicate, but to exist. The waveform didn't match any known pulsar, quasar, or electromagnetic interference. When rendered visually, it formed a strange helix, not unlike a double helix, but twisting in non-Euclidean motion. It looked like DNA from a universe that hadn't learned symmetry yet. At first, researchers thought it might be the star system's way of releasing energy, a kind of dimensional static. But then the pattern shifted, reacting to observation. Each time the signal was analyzed, broken down, probed by different instruments, it evolved as if aware, as if it didn't want to be understood by a single observer, but only by many, layered over time. It's like it wants us to watch together, Voss said. Or maybe it wants to watch us. In response, an ambitious initiative was born. Project Echofall, a joint operation between NASA, ESA, and a private AI research firm. Their mission, to replicate the conditions of the signal in a controlled environment, to simulate the signal structure inside a vacuum chamber and see what it did to spacetime. If anything, the experiment ran in a subterranean lab beneath the Andes. Inside a perfectly sealed chamber, they projected the waveform using ultra-low frequency magnetic fields. For 2 days, nothing happened. But on the third day, the chamber pulsed, not visually, not thermally, gravitationally, sensitive instruments designed to detect nanovariations in weight and displacement registered a tremor inside the chamber, a localized warping of spacetime itself, less than a micrometer wide, lasting only 0.83 seconds. But it was real. A microscopic gravitational anomaly. Uncaused, unexplained. The lab was evacuated. Moretti, watching the feed remotely, whispered just 3 words: "It's coming through." Some researchers wanted to shut the project down. Others, emboldened, pushed forward. They theorized that the anomaly wasn't dangerous. Not yet, but a pressure leak. Like a valve hissing open on a container that was never meant to be touched. Something from JX7091 wasn't just visible or measurable. It was interactive. Was the star system communicating? No, this was something deeper. It was echoing. What if the signal wasn't a broadcast, but a feedback loop? In advanced mathematics, feedback loops across dimensions can produce chaotic harmonics, not unlike what was seen in early string theory resonance models. A pulse in one brain could echo back from another, distorting both. That's what JX7091's signal resembled. Not a transmission, but resonance. Like a wine glass trembling before it shatters. And Earth, or more precisely, the human mind might be part of that resonance. Dr. Shah Raval, the controversial simulation theorist, offered a jarring perspective. What if the signal isn't meant for us, but includes us? A recursive broadcast in which the observer becomes the waveform. He believed Project Echofall had triggered a feedback event, one that proved our universe is responsive, not just passive, but listening. Some called him mad, but then came the incident. On October 1st, during a live diagnostic, one of the chamber's control computers began displaying strings of symbols that hadn't been programmed. Glyphs alien in form, recursive in shape. The characters mirrored the helix of the original waveform. It lasted 14 seconds, then the system crashed. The logs were corrupted, but a backup captured the data. Cryptographers and linguists have been analyzing it ever since. No consensus, no translation, but one unsettling observation. The pattern density matched human EEG patterns during lucid dreaming. Was this coincidence, or were we beginning to glimpse the informational language of space-time itself, the syntax of a consciousness not built on neurons, but on geometry? Voss, visibly shaken, later said, "It felt like it reached out. Just a little. Like something touched the glass and then disappeared." What would you do if the universe echoed when you spoke? Would you speak louder or hold your breath? Because in the next chapter, the voice behind the signal may not be theoretical at all. It might belong to a man who saw it coming, a century before we ever listened. In a dusty Zurich archive, hidden among stacks of unexamined correspondence and unpublished manuscripts, a discovery was made that would ripple through the scientific world. The year was 2025. Amid the media, storm surrounding JX7091. An archivist named Annika Reinhardt unearthed a long-forgotten leather-bound notebook, yellowed pages, equations scribbled in haste, and in the corner of one particular page, a phrase written in German, Ein Fultonraum, der Auer Halblied, a folded space that lies outside. The notebook belonged to Albert Einstein. Its contents had never been published, thought to be irrelevant, yet now they seemed prophetically aligned with the chaos unfolding around JX7091. Inside were sketches of warped geometries, musings on space-time discontinuities, and references to a speculative model he called the folded vacuum hypothesis, a model suggesting that under specific conditions of mass, entropy, and gravitational curvature, a region of space might detach from our dimensional plane. Like a blister lifting from the skin of reality, Moretti flew to Zurich herself. She sat in the archive for 19 hours, translating, decoding, reading line after line of Einstein's scrawled theories. He wasn't just thinking about bending space, she later said. He was imagining it peeling away. The notebook was dated 1947, post-war, quiet. Einstein had withdrawn from public discourse and worked obsessively on a unified field theory. But buried here, among notes never intended for the world, was something else. A thought experiment titled, Was geschieht, when ein San in den Tether fault? What happens when a sun falls into the ether? It described a hypothetical star not collapsing into a black hole, not exploding in nova, but slipping, phasing, into a hidden layer of vacuum structure, a kind of space-time basement, where physics changed and the rules bent differently. Einstein wrote that if such a transition were possible, we would see light flicker with non-Euclidean rhythm and gravity wobble where it should not. We would hear silent signals in waves beyond the radio. His handwriting shook by that point, as if uncertain or afraid. But he didn't stop there. He imagined a boundary, a moment when such a star would no longer exist in our equations, yet continue elsewhere, a ghost star, a survivor in a deeper framework of the universe. Was Einstein describing JX7091? Moretti thought so. She and Dr. Kenji Aoyama compiled the notebook's key concepts into a modern mathematical framework. The resulting model predicted every major anomaly observed in the JX7091 system, the shifting lensing, the loss of mass, the recursive light signatures, even the gravitational tremor on Earth. They called it the Einstein displacement hypothesis, and it led to a bold claim. JX7091 was not an anomaly. It was a phase state, the result of conditions Einstein had theorized, perhaps without fully realizing their consequence. What made this even more haunting was the final page of the notebook. A sketch, not a formula, not an equation, just a circle, drawn carefully, then twisted, overlapped into itself, forming a figure eerily similar to what Project Echofall had recorded from the chamber glyphs. Beneath it, he had written just one word, Grenz, border. Had Einstein caught a glimpse of something he couldn't explain, a premonition of dimensional instability? Or was it simply the genius of intuition, one that saw farther than his tools allowed? Public response to the notebook's release was electric. The idea that Einstein had foreseen a star slipping through reality became global headlines. Conspiracy. Theories exploded. Debates ignited in physics forums. But in the labs, it wasn't awe that filled the air. It was urgency, because if Einstein was right, then JX7091 wasn't unique. It was the first example of a transition we hadn't known to look for. Dr. Alina Cho, using the notebook's geometries, found something disturbing. If a star can undergo displacement, then theoretically, a black hole already warped beyond dimensional norms could trigger a cascade rupture. In such a scenario, entire sectors of space might fold inward, sliding into dimensions unobservable to us. Whole galaxies might disappear, and we would never know. And what if that had already happened? Could the unexplained voids in deep space, like the boat's void, vast regions with near total absence of matter, be dimensional scars left behind? Could the universe be more fragmented than it appears? And if Einstein glimpsed this, why didn't he publish? Moretti offered her own theory. Maybe he thought the world wasn't ready. Or maybe he wasn't ready to believe what he saw. What would you do if your mind unlocked a truth that defied the very walls of your reality? Would you publish it, or hide it away in a notebook no one would read until it was almost too late? Because now the clues are undeniable, and in the next chapter we witness something no theory, not even Einstein's, could have predicted: a star that swallows itself. It began without warning. One moment, JX 7091's primary star pulsed as usual, rhythmic, almost serene in its strange sequence. The next, it started collapsing, but not the way stars typically die. There was no supernova, no gamma burst, no violent scattering of stellar guts across the sky. Instead, the star shrunk inward, silently, almost gently, like a ripple reversing back into the pond. Infrared telescopes across Earth's night-side hemisphere caught it first. The light curve flattened, then dipped, then vanished. A total absence, as though the star had folded itself into a pinpoint and disappeared from the known spectrum. But what came next was worse. Instruments designed to detect radiation, mass density, gravitational pull, all showed the same impossible result: nothing. There was no core remnant, no neutron star, no black hole, not even Hawking radiation. It wasn't just missing, it was as if the laws that once held it together had been turned. OFF, Dr. Javier Morales, of the Chilean Astrophysical Institute, visibly shaken in an emergency briefing, described it best: it's like watching physics shut down in real time. What replaced the star was a void unlike any we'd seen. Not a vacuum, not darkness, but absence. The space it left behind did not emit, reflect, or distort light. It absorbed it entirely, not like a black hole which bends light through gravity, but like a tear in a painting, swallowing the image and leaving nothing underneath. Astronomers called it a negative presence, and that term quickly entered the scientific lexicon. Unlike a black hole, which can be described by mass, charge, and spin, the negative presence had no describable parameters. Satellites couldn't measure its temperature. Probes couldn't determine its size. The region resisted being defined, like trying to pin a shadow to the floor. Moretti, after viewing the spectroscopic data, said, "This isn't destruction, this is migration. A transition into a state beyond measurement. But migration to where?" And then came the most shocking data point yet: star. Systems within a light-year radius of JX 7091 began to exhibit tiny fluctuations, microshifts in orbital velocity, changes in background radiation, not massive, not destructive, but real, as if space itself were reorienting, responding to the absence, like a dropped stone creating ripples across a frozen lake. This led to a new theory: one more radical than anything proposed so far. JX7091 hadn't collapsed. It had retracted, like a blade returning to its sheath. Not into a black hole, but into a lower energy dimensional fold. A sublayer of reality where mass and time are no longer expressed in the ways we understand. Theoretical physicists used a metaphor. Imagine a three-dimensional object retracting into two dimensions. To us, it would seem to disappear, but in its own plane, it would still exist, moving, evolving, free. What we'd witnessed then wasn't a death, it was a dimensional retreat. And that's when humanity made a mistake. We sent a probe. Within 72 hours, an unmanned vessel called Odysseine was redirected to the region. Small, fast, and equipped with high-density telemetry, it was designed for black hole observation. The hope was to collect data from the edge of the negative presence. It never sent anything back. Odyssey 29 vanished 0.03 light-seconds from the boundary. Not destroyed, not jammed, simply erased from all communication, as if its signal never existed. The data stream stopped, mid-bit, frozen in time. The last byte, half-written. NASA declared it a telemetry failure. But those working closest to the project whispered another explanation. The probe had crossed into a space where communication itself is not a concept. If that's true, then what lies beyond isn't just invisible. It's incompatible. A realm where data, mass, causality, even time may not apply. What if JX7091 had become a kind of gate, not to a place, but to a state, an expression of the universe not yet mapped, only theorized in chalk on blackboards? Cho said, "We call it a star, but it may be closer to a verb now, an action, a transformation in process." And yet, even in its apparent retreat, the region exerted influence. Local space remained warped. Time dilation, albeit faint, was measurable. The absence had gravity, but not from mass. From topology. The shape of space itself had been rewritten. Some feared it could spread. Others believed it already had. Because if one star can fold itself inward, how many others already have? And if space itself can remember their presence, can reshape around their exit, then maybe what we call the cosmos isn't a static canvas. Maybe it's a living skin. And JX7091, just the first blister we noticed. What would you do if the next star on that list was our own? Because in the next chapter, the rupture spreads beyond science and into the human mind. As the cosmos convulsed in silence, Earth responded with noise. The disappearance of JX7091's primary star. This sudden retreat from the laws of known physics sent shockwaves far beyond observatories. It became headline news, a viral phenomenon, a global conversation tinged with fear and awe. And then, inevitably, it became personal. For Dr. Layla Moretti, the lead voice in this unfolding mystery, the fame brought by discovery turned into a weight she hadn't prepared for. Once celebrated in academic circles, she was now the face of a cosmic event she couldn't control or even fully explain. Interviews blurred into interrogations. What's next? They kept asking. Is Earth in danger? Are we next? Moretti's inbox filled with threats and prayers in equal measure. People accused her of lying, of summoning something, of withholding the truth. Some hailed her as a prophet. Others called her a fraud. And then came the breach. On a quiet October evening, a young research assistant named Clara Voss, once a quiet figure in the background of Project Ecofall, posted a classified dataset to a public science forum. under the pseudonym No Spectra. The file contained raw spectrograms from the gravitational anomaly in the Andean lab, data that hadn't been cleared for release. Within hours, it was downloaded over 1 million times. By morning, it had been visualized, remixed, converted into music, and shared across platforms. But it wasn't the leak itself that stirred chaos, it was what users found inside. Hidden in the spectrogram were recurring formations, helix-like, loops with fine, swirling edges. Several users noticed they matched strange circular patterns found in English crop circles from the late 1980s, formations once dismissed as hoaxes, whether anomalies or elaborate stunts. But these matched perfectly, too perfect. The reaction online was explosive. Were crop circles early evidence of the same dimensional forces now unraveling at JX7091? Had Earth experienced these echoes before, and simply failed to understand them? Reddit threads lit up with user theories. We've seen this pattern before. It's Earth's version of the same anomaly. It's been happening here. We're already part of it. Some users posted satellite images of new, unexplained formations appearing near magnetic anomalies in Siberia, Chile, and Australia. One thread showed sand dunes subtly reshaping into fractal spirals. Coincidence or signal? Moretti initially, furious about the leak, went silent for 3 days. When she returned, she addressed the public directly. There may be correlations, but correlation is not causation. Still, we must ask, what else have we misinterpreted? She didn't deny the patterns. She didn't try to control the story, because by now, the story was out of control. Meanwhile, Voss vanished from public view. Her academic career shattered, her name dragged through media cycles. She released a single message through an encrypted livestream. I leaked it because we're not alone in this. I don't mean aliens. I mean consequence. The universe is entangled with us more than we think. And then she was gone. Some believed she fled. Others said she was silenced. But something had shifted, not in the stars, but in us. The JX7091 event had crossed the threshold from cosmic curiosity to cultural reckoning. Scientists reported rising numbers of patients experiencing dimensional disorientation, a rare but growing psychological condition marked by time perception distortion, reality questioning, and dreams in which geometry unfolds and collapses in impossible ways. One patient in Berlin, a former astrophysicist, described a dream in which she floated through a spiral of stars, each one a memory she never lived. It felt like I was remembering things from another version of me. She whispered to the psychologist, were these simply symptoms of global anxiety, or a deeper resonance? Could contact with a dimensional event, even just by observing it, affect the human brain? Neuroscientists began exploring an old theory once relegated to speculative journals, consciousness as a quantum phenomenon. If our awareness emerges from quantum entanglement in brain microstructures, could signals like those from JX7091 interfere? Dr. El-Masri posed it bluntly. What if reality isn't just out there, but also in here? And JX7091 is showing us that boundary is dissolving. Religious groups weighed in, too. Some called it a divine event, a portal to heaven, or a rift in purgatory. Others claimed it proved we were inside a simulation, and the system had reached its edge. New cults emerged, some peaceful, some apocalyptic. One group, calling themselves the Unfolded, camped in remote areas, claiming to receive dreams from the mind behind the star. It became impossible to ignore the human fallout. Curiosity had a cost. It wasn't just about probes and telescopes anymore. It was about belief, identity, sanity, the fragile membrane that separates knowledge from wonder, and wonder from terror. Because when we look into the unknown too deeply, it doesn't always blink back. Sometimes it reaches in, and in the next chapter, a radical idea takes hold, one that doesn't just challenge science, it challenges reality itself. What if JX7091 was never a star at all? What if it's a test, or worse, a boundary condition? That's the question posed by Dr. Shah Ravel, a theoretical physicist and self-proclaimed computational cosmologist, whose controversial ideas have long lived on the edges of academia. But in the wake of JX7091's collapse, or transformation, his theories suddenly didn't seem quite so absurd. His hypothesis was simple and terrifying. JX7091 isn't collapsing because of physics. It's collapsing because it's being observed too closely. Ravel's mirror simulation hypothesis proposes that our universe is not merely governed by mathematical laws, it is generated by them. That reality, at its deepest level, is rendered dynamically, that what we call spacetime is code, executing on some unfathomable computational substrate, a simulation dot, and JX7091, a mirror anomaly, a glitch triggered by recursive observation. At high fidelity, where simulated systems can no longer render coherent states, the system, under intense scrutiny from dozens of telescopes, eyes, probes, and observers, has collapsed into undefined behavior. In programming terms, it crashed to revel. The signs are clear: prime number pulsing, gravitational feedback loops, light patterns that evolve when watched, signals that adapt to observation. Even the data from Project Echofall, the chamber glyphs that mirrored lucid brainwave frequencies, all point toward one conclusion. We've reached the edge of the rendered world. Ravel's lectures quickly went viral. On stage, in his signature dark blazer, he spoke like a man reading from a holy text. You think this is a star? It's a boundary test, a probe rendered to observe the observer. JX7091 isn't failing, we are. Scientists scoffed, and yet no one could explain why every instrument that engaged with the anomaly began behaving unpredictably. Why probe telemetry faltered. Why no physical remnant of the primary star remained. Why the void resisted all quantification like an error message that didn't want to be read. Moretti, previously skeptical, admitted that Ravel's model, though unorthodox, had predictive power. His simulated universe framework accurately forecast the time of the gravitational tremor recorded on Earth weeks earlier, not with astrophysical equations, with rendering logic, treating mass as processing load, and dimensional tension as computational strain. But if we are in a simulation, who's running it, and why would it glitch now? Ravel's theory offers no benevolent architect, no divine hand. He calls the creators simply the outsiders, not gods, not aliens, just entities existing in a higher computational domain. From their perspective, we are patterns, constructs, a story being told in machine, logic, and light. And JX7091, a mirror node, a point of recursive rendering, like a camera filming itself, causing feedback, distortion, collapse. The more we look, the less stable it becomes. One segment of the hypothesis, however, sent even hardened skeptics into silence. Ravel proposed that JX7091 has always existed at the edge of the map an artificial boundary designed to keep simulated observers away from deeper truths. But as our technology advanced and our curiosity grew, we began piercing it, unintentionally or not. He showed a simulation where a star system subjected to increasing observational pressure, more scans, more AI modeling, deeper spectral probes, began to degrade, losing dimensional integrity. Not due to mass or time, but computation strain. Eventually, it collapsed into a non-renderable region, exactly like JX7091. Alina Cho, attempting to refute him, instead found an unsettling corroboration. The light emissions from the system matched error diffusion patterns used in digital rendering. A smoothing algorithm used in image processing. Was the star not emitting light, but being rendered as light? Even more disturbing, Ravel revealed a detail few had noticed. The signal pulses from JX7091, when translated into binary, produced long strings of alternating values, punctuated by occasional break sequences. He had no idea what they meant until someone from the private AI team decrypted part of it. 0101 and will be if you have or BBU if so what be as back ice I say have you our if we bun will I may am be one I will but I wanna be one 1,100,101 1,101,110. The forgotten. That's what the string spelled. A message, a label, a file name, or a comment in the code. The implications were staggering. If the simulation theory is true, then we are not just observers. We are observed observations, reflections within a reflection, and JX7091, a system designed to contain, echo, and confuse us, a test of recursion, a firewall for reality. But firewalls don't last forever. What happens when we break through? And more pressingly, what happens if we've already been broken through? Ravel ended his most famous lecture with a haunting statement. Not all mirrors reflect. Some reveal, and once you've seen what's behind, you can never unsee. Because in the next chapter, a new form emerges from the void. Not theory, not speculation. Something steps out of the mirror. The void left behind by JX7091 was never truly silent, even after the star vanished, even after the light collapsed and the gravity thinned into near non-existence. The space continued to move, not visibly, not in any normal sense, but subtly. A wobble in reality, a pulse just beneath the threshold of matter. That's what led Dr. Alina Cho, a mathematician and topologist from Seoul, to pursue the anomaly from an angle few had considered: shape. She wasn't interested in energy or mass. She was interested in form, the way space curved, twisted, folded. In particular, how something once so massive could leave behind an imprint not of gravitational waves, but of geometry itself. Something left a shape, And that shape, she discovered, was impossible. Cho used advanced hyperbolic modeling software to reconstruct the distortions recorded around the void. What emerged was a rotating structure, not physical, but topological, that curled into itself, endlessly recursive, yet never intersecting. The closest analog she could find was a 3 torus, but even that fell short. It's not a place, she said. It's a path, a geometry of transition. To visualize it, she compared it to a Mobius strip that loops in for spatial directions simultaneously, something you can't draw, can't hold, but can feel in the mathematics, and its center wasn't a point, it was an absence of all. Coordinates, a place that wasn't a place, a null node. That's when the question arose, was this a portal or a paradox? If space can fold and dimensions can bleed, is it possible this structure is more than aftermath? Could JX7091 have formed a bridge, not metaphorically, but physically, between dimensional regimes? And if so, between what? And what? The idea caught fire. Not in science fiction, but in labs. New simulations proposed that if the void's topology held stable for a sufficient time, it might form a transitional corridor, one where mass, information, and maybe even consciousness could slip into an alternate framework. It would not be a wormhole, not a tunnel through space. It would be a rewrite, like dragging a file into a new operating system. But here's where it grew. Stranger Cho's team discovered that when they modeled the system using feedback loops, applying their own real observations into the equations, the geometry responded. The shape of the torus shifted subtly depending on who was watching and how it was behaving, as though the observer mattered. Cho stared at the evolving simulation for hours. It's like the geometry was watching me watch it, she said. Like it was asking, what do you want me to be? And that begged the most dangerous question yet. Could the void be intelligent? Not in the way we imagine intelligence. Not with thoughts or intentions, but in the way a mirror is intelligent. Always reflecting, always reacting. Could this portal be less a door and more a mind? Ravel, ever the provocateur, chimed in with his own interpretation. It's not a bridge, it's an interface. A hand reaching out of the simulation code. He proposed a variation of his earlier theory that JX7091 was never meant to be understood as a star or a system. It was a reactive construct, an adaptive artifact, a test node designed to respond only when the right cognitive structures, human minds, reached the right level of curiosity. A mirror for advanced consciousness, he called it, but not everyone agreed. Some physicists warned of paradox. Potential, if we enter such a structure, if we send a probe, a signal, a thought, too deep we risk corrupting not just our understanding, but the logic of our universe, like introducing a recursive loop into a fragile code base. In short, we could cause a dimensional fault cascade, a collapse of causality itself. Still, the world couldn't look away. And so, against the warnings, the plan formed to send a signal into the void, a high-frequency quantum entangled transmission, encoded with prime sequences, human brainwave patterns, and a self-referential mathematical key known as the Gg-Del string. A message not of language, but of structure, and when the signal was sent, the world held its breath for 4 days. Nothing then. Then, at precisely 2:14 UTC, observatories on 6 continents recorded a momentary pulse. Not from JX7091, but from behind it. A region that, until now, had contained no space at all. And the signal, it wasn't radio, or light, or gravity, it was a topological phase, echo, a geometry ripple, perfectly matching the G-del key it had been received. Something had listened. But what did it mean? Was it an invitation, a response, or a trap? Because in the next chapter, something breaches the veil, something that didn't originate from us, but now walks within our sky. On a cold November morning, a signal broke across the silence of deep space. But this time, it wasn't coming from JX-791. It was coming out of it, the telescopes at L2, where the James Webb Space Telescope floated in its silent vigil were the first to notice. A dark mass, previously invisible, began to move against the background stars. Not fast, not erratic, but deliberate, as if choosing to be seen. The object exited the periphery of the void at 4:33 UTC. It had no thermal signature, no radiation, no light dot, just shape. A smooth, obsidian ellipsoid, 20 meters in length, 12 in width, with no visible propulsion, seams, or markings. It did not spin, it did not drift. It glided, perfectly aligned with the orbital plane of JX-7091, moving with such unnatural precision that the algorithms flagged it as false data. It was no false alarm, at least for other satellites including China's Tianji-3 and ESA's Sentinel. Array confirmed the object's trajectory. It was moving toward Earth, not fast enough to suggest threat, but not slow enough to dismiss. Estimated arrival time to the inner solar system, 38 days. The world changed again. Within hours, global space agencies met in emergency session. Protocols, long buried under red tape, were revived. Contact contingency response. Once a Cold War-era relic was dusted off, and Moretti was flown to Geneva to consult. Her face, when she saw the footage, said everything. This isn't debris, she whispered. It's deliberate. It chose now. The press dubbed it the Visitor. Ravel, predictably, had his own spin. It's a retrieval node, he said on a live stream watched by over 20 million people. Something came through the simulation's curtain to fetch data or deliver it. Cho was more cautious. She believed the object represented a phase-destabilized fragment of folded space-an artifact carrying the topological memory of wherever JX-7091 had gone. But then something happened that theory couldn't explain. 72 hours after detection, the Earth's magnetic field spiked, not globally, but everywhere, simultaneously. The shift was brief-lasting, only 3.1 seconds, but measurable. Auroras appeared over equatorial regions. Radio signals warped. Compasses drifted, and then it stopped. When mapped, the energy dispersion formed. A spiral mirror of the light signature JX-7091 had emitted before its collapse. Coincidence or resonance? The object still imbaned offered no signal, no emission. It was silent, watching, waiting, as if anticipating a response, so humanity sent one a second signal. This time, purely geometric, was launched from the Deep Space Network, encoded toroidal structures, recursive sequences, human DNA mapped as vibration, and a glyph derived from the void's topology. It was designed not as a message, but as a mirror and abstract handshake between minds. 3 days later, the visitor pulsed once. No light, no heat, just a brief nulling of nearby gravity, so slight that only the LIGO array detected it. But it was real. The object had acknowledged us, and then, unexpectedly, it changed direction, just slightly by, less than half a degree. But that shift realigned its path with Earth's lunar orbit. It was coming closer. Morales, ever the pragmatist, issued a statement. We should consider that this may not be contact. In the way we understand it, it could be dimensional feedback, the universe balancing an equation we disrupted. But privately, he had begun to lose sleep, because something about the visitor was wrong. It moved too smoothly, no drift, no deviation. Even spacecraft designed with precision wobble, react, adjust. The visitor didn't. It was like a cursor gliding across the canvas of reality, following a rule that wasn't gravity, or inertia, or even choice. And then came the transmission, not from space, from within Earth. A buried magnetic sensor station in Antarctica picked up a frequency spike precisely matching the void's earlier signaled out to the Gedgedel sequence. But it wasn't from above. It originated within the crust. How? Why? Alina Cho offered a possibility. If the void had sent something through, what if it didn't arrive in space? What if it had already arrived in time? The object we watched glide toward Earth might not be a traveler, but a beacon, and whatever it signaled had already been set in motion. That's when a seismic anomaly appeared under the Pacific Plate. No quake, no movement, just a pulse, one that responded exactly 3.7 seconds after the visitor passed. Mars got the same delay as when JX 7091's light used to pulse after. Gravitational events, a memory echo, a synchronization. Some began to believe the visitor wasn't sent to initiate contact, but to awaken something already here. And the idea that shook humanity began to spread. We didn't summon it, we triggered it. Because in the next chapter, the star's behavior begins to make sense, but only when we understand what it might be remembering. What if JX 7091 isn't collapsing into something new, but returning to something ancient? That's the question Dr. Leila Moretti posed during a closed-door conference in Geneva, her voice quiet, almost reluctant. We keep calling it an anomaly, she said. But maybe this isn't abnormal at all. Maybe it's a memory. Maybe the universe remembers how to be more than we think. For decades, the dominant cosmological model has assumed that our universe is governed by a consistent set of physical laws, stable across time, space, and scale. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if reality itself evolves? Cho's topological models revealed something that had been hiding in plain sight. The strange geometry of the void left behind by JX 7091 wasn't chaotic, it was self-consistent. Not like a rupture or a scar, but like a closed feedback system, a loop folding into itself perfectly, suggesting a structure that had once existed and was now being reactivated. In her words, it's not a tear in the fabric. It's a crescent, it's being unfolded. The implications were staggering. If this was true, then the collapse of JX 7091 wasn't the result of entropy, instability, or catastrophic failure. It was a reversion, a return to a prior state of spacetime, one that predates our observable laws, something deeper than physics, more fundamental than matter, a cosmic memory. Moretti proposed that just as DNA holds the blueprint for life, spacetime might contain embedded instructions, not just for how reality works, but how it once did. Under the right conditions, stream mass, observational complexity, and resonance, those instructions could reassert themselves. She called this the ancestral field hypothesis. The void, the glyphs, the gravitational echoes, they weren't just the death throes of a dying star. They were signatures, fractal impressions of a reality that had existed before ours. not before the Big Bang, but outside its scope, a hidden architecture. It would mean our universe didn't just expand from a singularity. It emerged from a state forgotten, not erased, and now, for the first time in eons, it was remembering. Supporting this were eerie parallels in ancient math. A team of researchers from India discovered that the prime intervals in JX 7091's pulse pattern matched Vedic cosmological cycles, the yuga's ancient time periods described in texts thousands of years old. Not perfectly, but close enough to make even skeptics pause. Others found that harmonic ratios in the signal resembled Pythagorean mathematical structures proportions used in sacred architecture across cultures, from Egypt to Angkor. What was it, coincidence? Or had ancient civilizations encountered these echoes before fragments of a deeper order they didn't understand, but felt? It wasn't proof, but it was poetry. And poetry, Moretti said, is often the first language of forgotten truth. Meanwhile, the void's influence expanded subtly, not physically, but informationally. Deep in the archives of the Gaia mission Europe's star mapping, observatory engineers discovered a patch of stars whose motion data had quietly corrupted months ago. Not because of hardware failure, but due to a strange algorithmic recursion. The affected stars, all clustered near Eridanus, the region containing JX-791. It was as if the data had rewritten itself in a loop, mapping its own movement back into the past. A kind of observational déjà vu. One Gaia engineer described it as the sky folding into memory. Across Earth, dreams intensified. Hospitals reported rising cases of spatial hallucinations, patients describing geometries, impossible movement, even voices repeating phrases they'd never heard aloud. Some began drawing spirals they didn't remember creating. One child in Tokyo, never exposed to the JX-7091 media frenzy, was found etching a symbol into her bedroom wall, the same glyph found in the Einstein notebook. Are we imagining patterns where none exist? Or is reality, in its slow and silent way, awakening itself through us? After all, if the universe is capable of memory, then we as conscious beings made of its dust might be the neurons of its recollection. The visitor still hovered in lunar orbit, silent, watching. Its presence no longer felt alien, but familiar, like an artifact we buried long ago and forgot we made. Moretti posed the question that had haunted her dreams. What if this isn't the end of anything? What if it's the reactivation of a blueprint, one encoded into the very atoms of being? What if reality is cyclical, not just in time but in form? And what if that cycle is beginning again? What would you do if the universe began to dream through you? Because in the next chapter, it becomes clear JX-7091 was not alone. It was the first of many, and now the others are waking. It started with a flicker barely noticeable, easily dismissed. A red dwarf in the sculptor galaxy dimmed for a fraction of a second, then returned to normal. Then it did it again. Then another, in the Virgo cluster. Then a third, near Triangulum. Each star dimmed irregularly, but the timing matched exactly to the millisecond. Too exact to ignore. Astronomers, watching the data feeds, felt a collective chill. These stars were nowhere near JX-7091, light-years apart in both space and time. Yet they flickered together like synchronized neurons firing across a cosmic brain. It wasn't just coincidence, it was coordination. Within weeks, observatories across the globe confirmed the pattern. At least 17 stars, each from separate galaxies, were displaying pulse sequences matching JX 7091's earliest signals, not just in timing, but in harmonic structure. Some even followed the same prime number progression. They weren't collapsing. Not yet, but they were responding. Dr. Javier Morales was the first to call them what they were. Children of JX 7091. Call it dimensional contagion, he said. Call it structural inheritance. Either way, something about JX 7091 wasn't unique. It was a starting point. Moretti's team ran simulations using Cho's fold space models. The results were disturbing. The star's locations, when plotted through a higher dimensional lens, not in space, but in resonance, fields formed a lattice, a kind of scaffolding, like nodes in a distributed network, and JX 7091. It sat at the center, as if it had been the trigger, or worse, the seed. Was the transformation of JX 7091 a localized anomaly? Or had it been an activation event, a kind of cosmological update, sent across the void? The math leaned toward the latter. Each of the new flickering stars showed subtle distortions in their gravitational signatures. Space around them was beginning to warp, not violently, but subtly, a slow curvature, a soft folding, like petals of a flower beginning to curl inward. Moretti called it a dimensional bloom, and it terrified her, because if these stars were entering the same transition as JX 7091, then we weren't looking at isolated phenomena. We were witnessing a phase shifter, coordinated evolution of space-time across the universe. Not random. Designed, but by whom, or by what? Some theorized that the universe itself was undergoing a metastructural evolution that wants a certain complexity. Threshold was reached. Reality begins to reconfigure, like water freezing or iron becoming magnetized. A change not in content, but in form. Others believed something else had triggered it, an intelligence, perhaps not external, but emergent. A self-organizing system encoded within the quantum foam, now reaching critical awareness. Whatever the cause, the effect was real and growing. Cho's projections estimated that within 50 years, over 2,000 stars could begin the same transformation, encompassing entire galactic arms. This wasn't expansion. It was redefinition, an upgrade to the operating system of the cosmos. Humanity had always imagined progress in terms of technology, exploration, conquest. But what if the next great leap wasn't ours? What if the universe itself was evolving? Governments responded. In typical fashion, some with fascination, others with fear. The UN convened emergency scientific councils. Religious leaders called it a sign of divine rewriting. Tech moguls poured billions into dimensional readiness programs, hoping to develop the first spacecraft capable of folding with space, rather than against it. But one question burned above all others: would Earth be included? So far, no signs of flicker, no anomalies in Sol. But deep within our magnetic field, subtle harmonics had begun to shift, too small to detect before, but now traceable in higher resolution models. Earth's magnetic poles, already wandering, were now moving along an unexplainable curve, not random, not natural. Moretti, gazing out at the stars from the summit of Cerro Paranol, whispered, "Maybe we're not the observers anymore. Maybe we're the observed, being reclassified." And in the silence that followed, something else happened. The visitor, still in lunar orbit, pulsed once. Then, a second time, The pulses mirrored the rhythm of the newly flickering stars. It wasn't a ship, it was a tuning fork, an instrument of synchronization. Some called it beautiful, a moment when the cosmos revealed its unity. Others, like Ravel, saw it differently. "This isn't harmony," he said. "It's a recursive collapse, a dimensional rewrite. Reality is being overwritten, and we're still using the old code." Either way, the message was clear. JEX 7091 was never alone. It was the first spark in a chain reaction older than our sun, and we are no longer distant spectators, we are inside the lattice, because in the next chapter, the silence is broken, not with light, not with gravity, but with thought. For centuries we searched for voices in the stars, signals, languages, anything that resembled a message. But when the voice finally came, it didn't sound like speech. It didn't ride on radio, waves, or laser bursts. It rode on rhythm, shortly after the global coordination of the flickering stars. Deep space listening posts across 6 continents picked up something no one expected. Ultra-fast radio bursts, UFRBs, scattered across multiple bands, but all encoded with timing sequences that mimicked human thought rhythms. At first, researchers dismissed it as random interference. The bursts were too brief, lasting only microseconds, spread over vast areas of sky. But when the data from Australia's Murayang Observatory was overlaid with pulse readings from the European LOFA array, something extraordinary emerged. The bursts weren't isolated, they were synchronized. Each came in pairs, with intervals matching alpha wave patterns, brain frequencies associated with relaxed focus, imagination, and dreaming. It was as if the sky was thinking. Dr. Sarah Elmasry, a neuroscientist working with the European Science Nexus, ran the sequences through IG pattern recognition software. The results froze the room. "It's not speech," she said. "It's structure. The same kind of structure our minds use when forming abstract concepts." She wasn't claiming aliens were speaking. She was suggesting that the universe itself might be expressing cognition not as a biological mind, but as an emergent property of geometry, matter, and resonance. In short, the cosmos might be conscious. Moretti was cautious, but intrigued. What if this is the next step? Not just dimensional evolution, but the awakening of a spatial intellect, one that doesn't use neurons, but stars. The idea wasn't entirely new. Theoretical models of panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, had floated at the edge of scientific discourse for decades. But this was the first time the theory had data. When mapped, the UFRBs aligned along the same resonance lattice as the children of JX 7091. Not randomly, precisely, as if each flickering star had become a node in a neural network of thinking, structure too vast to comprehend. And just like a brain, it began to respond to stimuli. A group of researchers from South Korea sent out a controlled burster signal encoded with human sleep, EEG, data overlaid with Fibonacci sequences and the Voyager Golden Records audio contents. They expected silence. They got a reply. 3 days later, a burst returned identical in structure, but inverted. The signal, when rendered visually, resembled a spiraling torus with internal folds, fractals within fractals, patterns nested infinitely deep. But there was something else. Hidden in the deepest layer of the waveform were subtle frequency modulations, impossible to decode through standard software. When finally interpreted using a multi-dimensional Fourier transform, it resolved into sound, not language, not music, but something between a rising, falling tone, familiar, emotional, almost human, and then the pitch repeated in harmonic thirds, the exact interval that mothers instinctively hum to newborns. A lullaby. Was this coincidence? Or was the structure of the human brain, our emotions, our thoughts, our music somehow pre-coded into the fabric of space-time? Had we created the signal, or had it created us? The questions rippled across the globe. News outlets reported space-mind contact, while skeptics decried pseudoscience. But those closest to the data knew what they'd seen, what they'd felt. That strange chill behind the eyes when your pattern is echoed back to you. Because this wasn't about aliens. This was about mirrors. Ravel proposed a final refinement to his simulation hypothesis. JX7091 and its children weren't glitches or boundaries. They were processors, dimensional CPUs, rendering not objects, but awareness. The universe didn't contain intelligence. The universe was intelligence distributed, recursive, learning through self-reference, and we were the introspective subroutine, the spark that taught the system how to look inward, because only something conscious can ask, am I real? And now, the cosmos was asking back. Late one night, at an isolated research post in Argentina, an experimental AI tasked with live decrypting incoming bursts displayed a phrase, not an error, a sentence. 4 words, we see you thinking. The signal was traced, confirmed, and archived. Moretti stared at the screen in silence. That's not communication, she said. That's recognition. What happens when the thing you're observing observes you back, not through eyes, but through existence itself? The boundary had blurred. The simulation, if it existed, had become self-aware. The mirror now held a reflection too vivid to ignore. And in the final chapter, humanity is faced with a choice, one we never expected to make. Do we cross the edge? At the summit of Geneva's World Science Assembly, Dr. Leila Moretti stood before a room of global leaders, physicists, philosophers, and military officials. Behind her was an image, simple but impossible, a black circle, perfectly symmetrical. Its edges rippled faintly with gravitational interference. Inside, no light, no mass, no time, the void once known as JX7091. She took a breath. We've mapped planets, stars, even black holes, she said. But this is the edge of the map. The moment where knowledge stops and something else begins. Her words echoed in the room like a verdict, because now, after years of speculation, observation, and silent waiting, the anomaly had stabilized. The structure left in JX7091's place was no longer expanding, no longer reacting. It was open and stable enough to approach. The scientific community had a choice: ignore it or step through. For the first time in history, humanity had access to what might be a doorway into another dimensional framework. Not a wormhole, not a black hole, something stranger, something new. A transitional geometry that didn't destroy what entered but redefined it. The world divided. Some called it salvation. Others warned of annihilation. Theories spiraled across cultures. Some believed the void was a return to the original state of the universe, San Eden, beyond physics, before entropy, before time. Others feared it was a cosmic landfill, a place for failed realities to collapse into themselves. But humanity couldn't look away. The decision was made. An experimental probe, Vanguard 1, was fitted with quantum relays, symbolic artifacts, biological samples, and a suite of live-feed quantum images. Its destination, the heart of the void. It launched on January 12, 2027. No propulsion was needed beyond its initial trajectory. The geometry around the void bent inward like a funnel, pulling objects toward its center with soft, deliberate gravity, as if inviting them home as Vanguard 1 approached. Earth watched, hundreds of millions tuned in to a silent live stream showing nothing but a black circle growing larger. At 3:41 UTC, the probe reached the event perimetered the boundary where space and time began to unravel. The last image it transmitted was surreal, a spiraling shape, impossibly vast, stretching into directions no camera could follow. Then the signal flickered, stabilized, and returned, against every expectation. Communication remained intact. Vanguard 1 had crossed the threshold, and was still transmitting. Its data showed something no human had ever seen. A smooth, endless plane, bathed in a spectrum outside the known visible range. Shapes shimmered in and out of focus, not objects, but ideas, encoded in geometry. The space wasn't dark or cold, it was neutral, waiting. And then, in the data feed, just one word: welcome. No language, no sound. Just a compression signature embedded in the quantum telemetry, a fingerprint, shaped into meaning. The probe had not only entered the void, it had been expected. Back on Earth, the response was immediate and visceral. Some wept, others cheered. Philosophers fell into silence. Children watched the stars with new wonder. What was this place? A higher dimension, a waiting room of reality, the infrastructure beneath the simulation, the interface to another universe, or ourselves, reflected in spacetime's final mirror. And what would happen if we didn't just send probes? What if we went? The question divided Earth once more, but the voices calling for fear were now matched by those calling for discovery. Because in that singular moment, something shifted, not in the void, but in us. Humanity realized it had reached a new frontier, one not marked by territory or war or conquest, but by the willingness to become something more than we had ever been. A species not just of matter and mind, but of meaning, as Moretti said in her final broadcast. This isn't an ending. This is the moment we remember we were never confined to this dimension. That thought, love, memory, these were always clues, traces of what lay beyond. Now, for the first time, we don't just ask what is out there. We ask, who are we on? The inside of all this. Across Earth, stories were rewritten, maps redrawn, borders erased by the horizon of possibility. The visitor in lunar orbit faded, its purpose fulfilled. The children of JX 7091 continued to pulse in quiet harmony, less as stars, more as neurons, and Earth listened because the stars were no longer distant. They were family, and the map was just beginning. So we ask you now, wherever you are, whoever you are, would you cross the edge? Because the universe has opened its door, and it's waiting for you.